The Gulf of Tonkin attack that launched the Vietnam War never happened. Declassified, admitted. The weapons of mass destruction that justified the Iraq War never existed, admitted. Operation Northwoods, a government plan to stage terrorist attacks on American citizens to justify invading Cuba, was a real document signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1962. Declassified, admitted. These are not theories. These are documented historical facts. So I want to ask you something seriously. At what point does a pattern of proven deception stop being a series of isolated mistakes and start being a system? Because I think we passed that point a long time ago.
Welcome back to the Promethean Depths. I'm Solen.
Today we are going somewhere most philosophy channels won't touch, not because the evidence isn't there, but because the implications are uncomfortable enough that most people would rather not follow them to their conclusion. We're talking about psychological operations, state-sponsored deception, the manufacturing of public consent on a mass scale, what the ancient traditions understood about it, what the modern architects of it understood about it, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it.
This is not a conspiracy episode. Everything we discuss today has a paper trail, documents, admissions, declassified records. The philosophy is in how we understand what those documents reveal about the nature of power and perception.
Let's go. Let's establish the foundation before we get into the philosophy. Because the word Psy-Op gets thrown around so loosely now that people either dismiss it entirely or apply it to everything. So let's be specific. A psychological operation, in the official military definition, is the use of information to influence the perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors of a target audience. That's the definition. Written by the people who run them. Gulf of Tonkin, August 1964. President Johnson used an alleged attack on U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin to push Congress into authorizing the Vietnam War. 58,000 Americans died. Over 2 million Vietnamese died. The attack, as described, did not happen. NSA documents declassified in 2005 confirmed that the intelligence was manipulated. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara admitted it before he died. Iraq, 2003. Colin Powell stood in front of the United Nations and presented evidence of weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. The intelligence was fabricated or manipulated. Over 200,000 civilians died. The architects of that war faced no legal consequences. Operation Mockingbird, a CIA program, confirmed by congressional investigation in 1975, in which the agency paid journalists at major American news outlets to plant stories favorable to U.S. foreign policy objectives. Confirmed, documented, and then largely forgotten. These are not the only examples. They are the most documented ones.
And what strikes me philosophically about all of them is the same thing. They all required a population willing to believe what it was told without demanding verification. The operations didn't work because the governments were omnipotent. They worked because the people trusted the source.
Which brings us to the first philosophical question of the day. What does it mean to trust an institution? And at what point does that trust become a liability rather than a foundation? The ancient traditions were not naive about this. Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained in a cave, watching shadows projected on a wall, believing the shadows are reality. The shadows are curated. The projectors are hidden. The prisoners don't know they're prisoners because they've never seen anything else. What Plato understood, and what makes this 2,400-year-old allegory still the most precise description of our current media environment, is that the manipulation doesn't require force. It only requires controlling what the prisoners are allowed to see.
The Gnostic tradition took it further. The Gnostics described the material world as being administered by what they called the archons, forces whose primary function was to keep human consciousness trapped in a manufactured reality. They weren't describing demons in the supernatural sense. They were describing systems, institutions, mechanisms of control that perpetuate themselves because they benefit from the population remaining unaware.
And here's what I find most significant about the Gnostic framework. The archons don't need malice. They just need the system to keep producing the outcomes that sustain them. Confusion is profitable. Division is profitable. Fear is profitable. The system doesn't need a villain sitting in a room laughing. It just needs people who don't look.
The Hermetic principle of mentalism, all is mind. Whoever controls the mental environment controls the experience of reality for everyone inside it. This is not mystical abstraction. It is a precise description of what a media ecosystem does. It constructs a mental environment, and whoever builds and maintains that environment determines what billions of people believe is real.
And the Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, means the deceptions happening at the highest levels of power are reflected in the smallest details of daily life. The ingredient list nobody reads. The fine print nobody examines. The same mechanism operating at the macro level is operating at the micro level simultaneously. Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew. In 1928, he published a book literally titled Propaganda, in which he argued that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. He called the people who do this an invisible government. His words, not mine. He got women to smoke cigarettes by framing it as a feminist act, torches of freedom. He got America to eat bacon for breakfast by commissioning a study and reporting it as doctors recommend bacon and eggs. He worked for the United Fruit Company to help orchestrate the CIA-backed coup of Guatemala's democratically elected president in 1954. The coup happened. The government fell. The United Fruit Company kept its land. This is not ancient history. This is the blueprint that every major public relations firm, every government communications office, and every social media algorithm is operating from today. The tools are more sophisticated. The mechanism is identical.
And what strikes me about Bernays specifically is his honesty about it. He didn't hide what he was doing. He wrote it in a book, which tells you something important. The system doesn't fear exposure. It fears organized, clear-eyed, sustained resistance to the mechanism itself.
Because exposure without understanding is just outrage. An outrage is useful to the system. An outraged population is a reactive population. A reactive population is a manageable population. What the system cannot manage is a population that understands the mechanism clearly enough to stop being moved by it unconsciously.
Jung identified what he called the participation mystique, the unconscious merging of individual identity with the collective. Most people do not experience themselves as separate from the cultural narrative they were raised inside. Questioning it doesn't feel like critical thinking. It feels like drowning. This is why the first response to information that contradicts the official narrative is almost never curiosity. It's anxiety, then dismissal, then hostility.
The architects of modern propaganda understood this. The most effective control is not external. It's internal. Get the population to police itself. Create social consequences for questioning so severe that the question never gets asked publicly. You don't need censorship if you have social shame. The population censors itself.
Every major liberation tradition, Stoicism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, has a practice specifically designed to address this. The common thread is the same. You must be willing to examine what you believe, regardless of the social cost of examining it. Truth is not determined by consensus. It never was.
Epictetus put it simply. First say to yourself what you would be. Then do what you have to do, not what the crowd approves. not what the institution validates. What is actually true based on your own careful examination. That practice, in the current environment, is an act of genuine courage.
3 moves for navigating a world where psychological operations are documented, ongoing, and operating across every major information channel. First, source the source. Before you accept any narrative, ask who benefits from you believing it. Not who claims to benefit, who actually benefits. Follow the money, follow the power. Aristotle said, follow power and the pattern reveals itself. Second, sit with the discomfort of not knowing. The Psy-Op works because humans hate uncertainty. The practice of tolerating ambiguity, of saying I don't know yet, and resisting the pressure to resolve that discomfort with whatever narrative is being offered is one of the most powerful acts of cognitive resistance available to you. Third, distinguish between the individual and the system. Most people participating in these mechanisms are not malicious. They are institutional. They are incentivized. The problem is not individual bad actors. It is a system that selects for compliance and punishes deviation. Understanding that distinction keeps you from misdirecting your energy at individuals while the system continues undisturbed.
I'd add one thing. Document your own thinking. Write down what you believe and why before major news events. Not after, before. Then compare what you wrote to what you believe after the coverage cycle ends. Over time, you will see exactly where your thinking was moved without your consent. That is the most direct way to map your own vulnerability to the mechanism. Here's what I want to say to the person who finds this disturbing and wants to believe it isn't true. I understand that. If the information environment has been deliberately constructed to manage your perception of reality, then everything you thought you understood has to be re-examined. The impulse to not believe it is not stupidity, it is psychological self-protection. But the documents exist, the admissions exist, the pattern exists. And a person who has seen the pattern clearly is not more paranoid than before. They are less manipulable. They lose the anxiety that comes from sensing something is wrong, but not being able to name it. Clarity is not more frightening than confusion. It just feels that way before you get there.
None of this means everything is a lie. None of this means trust nothing. You cannot single-handedly dismantle the information architecture of the modern world, but you can refuse to be moved by it unconsciously. You can ask better questions. You can source the source. You can sit with not knowing. You can document your own thinking. That is not nothing. That is everything that is actually available to you.
This week, pick one news story you accepted without questioning and trace it back. Who reported it first? Who funded the outlet? Who benefits from that narrative being believed? Don't do it to confirm a counter-narrative. Do it to practice the skill of sourcing the source. Do it once and see what you find.
And if what you find is uncomfortable, stay with it. The discomfort of truth is temporary. The cost of managed ignorance is permanent. That's episode 3 of the Promethean Depths. If this cracks something open, share it. Someone in your life has been feeling this and doesn't have the framework yet. Give it to them.
Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. We're just getting started.
Think for yourself.
Question everything.